Felix is too trusting, my wife Kalia announced to her friends at our backyard barbecue, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she thought she was being clever. Honestly, sometimes I wonder how he survived 12 years working for the government. The circle of perfectly manicured women laughed on cue, their wine glasses catching the late afternoon sunlight. I was supposed to be inside getting more ice, but something about that laugh made me pause at the sliding door. That wasn't the warm laughter of affection. It was the sharp, cutting sound people make when they think they're in on a joke at someone else's expense. "She's absolutely right," I said, pulling up a chair to their little circle. "Last month, she said she was at her mother's house helping with some paperwork. I trusted her completely." Kalia's smile flickered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "See? Too trusting." I reached for the remote to our outdoor smart TV setup. "Want to see just how trusting I am?" The screen flickered to life, and I navigated to the GPS history from our shared family account. Kalia's location data filled the display in neat little pins across a map of our city. I zoomed in on the dates from last month when she'd claimed to be at her mother's house on Maple Street. 37 visits to the same downtown address, I said conversationally, watching the color drain from her face. "Funny thing is, that's not anywhere near your mother's house, is it?" The smart TV's reflection caught the glare of the setting sun, casting harsh shadows across the faces of her friends. Jennifer Morrison set down her wine glass so hard I heard it crack against the stone patio. Lisa Chen gathered her purse without a word. The others followed suit, suddenly remembering urgent appointments and early mornings. "Felix, what are you doing?" Kalia's voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Being too trusting, apparently. I clicked through more dates, more pins, all leading to the same address. "Looks like you've been very consistent in your visits to, let me see here, 1247 Harborview Drive, Unit 12B. The wine glass slipped from Kalia's hand, shattering against the imported Italian tile we'd spent 3 months picking out together. The stem snapped cleanly, leaving jagged edges that caught the light like tiny mirrors. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can." I stood up, pocketing the remote. "But maybe save it for someone who's still too trusting to look up property records." Our daughter Tessa appeared at the sliding door, her phone in hand as always. "Dad, what's going on? Mom looks like she's about to throw up." "Your mother was just telling her friends about my trusting nature. We were having a demonstration." Kalia shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the stone. "You have no right to what? Check the GPS history on our shared family plan? To wonder why my wife of 20 years has been lying about her whereabouts?" I kept my voice level, conversational. "You're right, honey. I have been too trusting." The last of her friends had vanished through the side gate, leaving their half-full glasses behind like evidence of a crime scene. Tessa looked between us, her thumb hovering over her phone screen in that way kids do when they're deciding whether something's worth filming. "Put the phone away, Tessa," I said, without looking at her. "This isn't for social media." "Felix, please let me explain." "Explain what? That 1247 Harborview Drive belongs to Rylan Ventor? That would be your old college boyfriend, right? The one you said you hadn't seen in years?" Kalia's face went white. "How did you—" "Property records are public, Kalia. So are business filings. Ventor Holdings, LLC. Registered agent, Rylan Ventor. Business address, 1247 Harborview Drive, Unit 12B. I smiled, but there wasn't any warmth in it. Funny thing about being a forensic accountant for the Treasury Department for 12 years. You learn how to follow money trails, and you never really stop. She was backing toward the house now, her hands shaking. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. What I don't understand is why you thought I wouldn't figure it out." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos. "Want to see the incorporation documents for Ventor Holdings, filed 6 months ago? Or maybe you'd prefer the bank statements showing regular transfers from our joint savings account?" "Dad, what are you talking about?" Tessa had moved closer, her earlier phone readiness replaced by genuine concern. "Your mother has been conducting some creative financial planning," I said. $2.3 million to be precise, money that used to be in my retirement accounts. Kalia made a sound like air being let out of a tire. "It's not what you think, it's exactly what I think. The only question is how long you thought you could keep it up." I turned to Tessa. "Your mother's been signing my name to withdrawal forms, quite skillfully, actually, almost like she had help from someone who knows about notarization." "Maren," Kalia whispered. "Your cousin Maren, yes. The notary. Funny how family helps family, isn't it?" I pocketed my phone. "Don't worry, I'm sure she'll be very helpful when the authorities start asking questions about forged signatures." Tessa was staring at her mother now, the pieces clicking together in her 19-year-old mind. "Mom, did you steal from Dad?" "I didn't steal anything. It's complicated, Tessa. Your father doesn't understand business." "I understand theft," I said quietly. "I understand fraud. I understand conspiracy. What I don't understand is how you thought this would end." Kalia's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at it, and her face somehow managed to get even paler. "Let me guess," I said. "Rylan's wondering why the barbecue ended early?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The notification sound had been distinctly masculine, a different tone than her usual messages. "You might want to call him," I suggested. "Tell him I said hello. Tell him I'm looking forward to meeting him properly. Tell him I know about the shell company, the forged documents, and the Lisbon tickets." "What Lisbon tickets?" Tessa demanded. "The one-way flights your mother's boyfriend booked for next week. First class. Paid for with my retirement money." I headed for the sliding door. "Don't worry, though. I don't think he'll be taking that trip." "Why not?" Kalia's voice was barely a whisper. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the wreckage of her perfect little gathering. Broken glass, abandoned wine, the smart TV still displaying her GPS coordinates like a digital scarlet letter. "Because I made a few calls today. Turns out my old colleagues at FinCEN are very interested in sudden large cash movements and suspicious travel patterns. Amazing how quickly they can freeze accounts when they smell money laundering." The notification sound came again from Kalia's phone. This time, she didn't look. "You might want to answer that," I said. "Something tells me Rylan's having a very interesting conversation with some federal agents right about now." The beauty of spending 12 years tracking financial crimes for the federal government is that you develop certain habits, you document everything, you assume everyone is lying, and you never ever trust a financial transaction that doesn't have a clear, logical explanation. Kalia thought I'd gone soft in the 5 years since I left Treasury. She saw me in my home office, doing freelance accounting for small businesses, and assumed I'd lost my edge. What she didn't realize was that I'd kept all my old contacts, all my old skills, and most importantly, all my old paranoia. The first red flag had been subtle, a notification from our bank about a change to my retirement account beneficiaries. When I called to ask about it, they told me I'd submitted the paperwork myself 2 weeks earlier. The signature looked right, the notarization was proper, everything was in order. Except I'd never submitted any paperwork. That's when I started watching. Not dramatically, not obviously, just the way you watch when you've spent over a decade assuming everyone is running some kind of scam. I checked statements more carefully. I noticed patterns in Kalia's schedule. I started paying attention to conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The GPS tracking had been almost an afterthought. We'd set up the family plan years ago for safety, back when Tessa was in high school, and we wanted to know she'd made it to her destinations safely. Kalia had forgotten it existed. I hadn't. Now, sitting in my office at 2 a.m, I spread out the evidence like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Bank statements showing systematic withdrawals, signature cards that looked like mine but weren't quite right, notarization stamps from Maren's office, and underneath it all, the incorporation documents for Ventor Holdings, LLC. Rylan Ventor had been Kalia's college boyfriend 25 years ago. She'd mentioned him occasionally over the years, always in passing, always in the context of someone I used to know. She'd even shown me his wedding announcement in the alumni magazine 5 years back, making some comment about how he'd married a lawyer from Chicago. What she hadn't mentioned was that he'd gotten divorced 18 months ago, or that he'd moved back to our city, or that he'd started a real estate development company with very vague business purposes and a remarkable ability to attract investment from retirement accounts belonging to forensic accountants. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, noon, Harborview Drive." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Which unit? 12B?" The response came immediately. "How did you—" "Lucky guess. See you at noon." I set the phone aside and went back to the documents. The beauty of financial crimes is that they always leave trails. Money doesn't just disappear, it moves, and every movement creates records. The trick is knowing where to look and having the patience to follow every thread. The shell company was elegant in its simplicity. Ventor Holdings existed to hold assets for development projects that never quite materialized. It had one investor, a retirement account belonging to Felix Rourde, and one beneficiary, Rylan Ventor himself. The money flowed in through forged withdrawal authorizations and flowed out through management fees, consulting payments, and expense reimbursements. On paper, it looked almost legitimate. In practice, it was theft with extra steps. My office door creaked open. Kalia stood in the doorway, still in her clothes from the barbecue, her makeup smeared from crying. "I know you're angry," she began. "I'm not angry," I said, not looking up from the documents. "Angry is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. This is something else entirely." "Felix, please, let me explain." "Explain what? The forged signatures? The shell company? The boyfriend?" I finally looked at her. "Or maybe you want to explain why you thought I was too stupid to figure it out." She stepped into the room, wrapping her arms around herself. It wasn't supposed to be like this. What was it supposed to be like? Rylan had this opportunity, a development deal that would have tripled the investment, but he needed capital, and the banks wouldn't. "Stop." I held up a hand. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself right now? You're talking about my retirement money like it was some kind of venture capital fund." "I was going to tell you." "When? After you and Rylan were safely in Lisbon?" Her face crumpled. "How do you know about Lisbon?" "Because I know about everything, Kalia. The tickets, the accounts, the plan to disappear with $2.3 million of my money." I stood up, gathering the documents into neat piles. "The question isn't how I know. The question is why you thought you could get away with it. We weren't going to disappear. We were going to—" "You were going to what? Send me a postcard? Maybe a nice email explaining how you'd found true love and decided to take my life savings with you as a wedding gift?" She was crying now, but I felt nothing. The woman standing in my office was a stranger wearing my wife's face, and I'd spent too many years interrogating strangers to be moved by tears. "The money's gone, isn't it?" I asked. "Not all of it, but most of it. Transferred to accounts I don't have access to. Converted to assets I can't touch. Hidden in ways that would take months to unravel through normal legal channels." She nodded miserably. "Good thing I don't plan to use normal legal channels." Her head snapped up. "What do you mean?" I smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. Not the good kind of warmth, the kind that comes from anticipating something satisfying. "I mean that you picked the wrong mark, honey. You thought you were scamming some soft suburban accountant who'd roll over and take it. What you actually did was steal from someone who spent 12 years learning how to destroy financial criminals." "Felix, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared, because tomorrow at noon, I'm going to meet with your boyfriend, and then I'm going to show both of you what happens when you try to con someone who knows more about financial crime than you do." She backed toward the door. What are you going to do? I'm going to give you exactly what you deserve, both of you. I sat back down and picked up my phone. Now get out of my office. I have work to do. After she left, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Danny Morrison worked for FinCEN now, the financial crimes enforcement network that had been my home for over a decade. He owed me favors from a case we'd worked together in Detroit. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. Felix? Jesus, what time is it? Time for you to do me a favor, Danny. I've got a suspicious activity report that needs to be filed. Tonight. What kind of activity? I looked at the documents spread across my desk, each one representing another piece of my wife's betrayal, another step in her carefully planned theft. The kind that's going to ruin someone's whole year. Unit 12B was everything I'd expected from a man trying to impress a woman with stolen money. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture that looked like it came from a catalog, and the kind of sterile cleanliness that screamed, I hired someone to make this look sophisticated. Rylan Ventor answered the door wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's car payments. He was taller than I'd expected, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested regular gym visits and expensive grooming. 25 years ago, I could see how he might have turned a college girl's head. Now he just looked like a middle-aged man trying too hard to pretend he wasn't middle-aged. Felix. He stepped aside to let me in, his voice carrying forced casualness. Thanks for coming. Nice place, I said, looking around. Business must be good. It has its moments. He gestured toward a leather couch that probably cost more than my car. Can I get you something to drink? I'm fine. Let's just get to it. He sat across from me in a matching chair, his hands clasped in front of him in what I recognized as a practiced gesture of sincerity. I'd seen it 1,000 times in interrogation rooms, the pose of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation but wasn't quite as confident as they wanted to appear. Look, Felix, I know this situation is complicated. Complicated. I nodded thoughtfully. That's one word for it. Theft is another. Fraud works too. Conspiracy has a nice ring to it. His composure slipped for just a moment. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You and my wife forged my signature on financial documents, transferred my money to accounts I don't control, and planned to leave the country with the proceeds. In what universe is that complicated? Kalia said you were in financial trouble, that you'd asked her to help move money around to avoid... Stop. I held up a hand. Just stop right there. Do you really think I'm going to sit here and let you pretend this was some kind of favor? He shifted in his chair, and I caught a glimpse of the man behind the expensive clothes and practiced charm. He was nervous. Good. What do you want, Felix? I want my money back. All of it. Plus interest. Plus penalties for the time and trouble you've caused me. That might be difficult. The money's been invested. In what? Your lifestyle? This apartment? The first-class tickets to Lisbon that got canceled this morning? His face went white. How did you know about the tickets? The same way I know about your bank accounts, your business registration, and the very interesting phone call you received from FinCEN about 3 hours ago. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. You called the feds? I didn't have to call them. I used to be them. When someone files a suspicious activity report about sudden large cash movements and international travel plans, they tend to pay attention. I lean back in the expensive couch, especially when the report comes from someone they trust. You can't prove anything. Can't I? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos I'd taken of the documents. Forged signatures, falsified notarization, wire transfers to accounts you control. What exactly do you think I can't prove? He turned from the window, and I could see the desperation starting to show around his eyes. Kalia said you wouldn't fight this. She said you'd just accept it and move on. Kalia doesn't know me as well as she thinks she does. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Here's what's going to happen, Rylan. You're going to transfer every penny back to my accounts, today, and then you're going to disappear from my wife's life permanently. And if I don't? Then you're going to find out what happens when the federal government decides you're worth their time and attention. Ever been audited by the IRS? Ever had your assets frozen pending a criminal investigation? Ever spent time in a federal facility while awaiting trial? He was sweating now, despite the air conditioning. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled up another photo on my phone, a screenshot of an email from Danny Morrison. This is confirmation that FinCEN has opened a preliminary investigation into Ventor Holdings, LLC. Want to see the part where they request all banking records for the past 2 years? He sank back into his chair like someone had cut his strings. Jesus. Jesus isn't going to help you here. But cooperation might. I put my phone away. Transfer the money back, and maybe this all goes away quietly. Keep playing games, and I'll make sure every financial institution in the country knows your name. It's not that simple. Some of the money's already been spent. Then you'll figure out how to unspend it. Sell the furniture, sell the car, sell whatever you need to sell, but my money comes back to my accounts or you're going to have much bigger problems than an angry husband. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of expensive appliances and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out if there was an angle he hadn't considered, some way to salvage his plan. Kalia won't leave me, he said finally. Even if you get the money back, she won't stay with you. That's her choice to make. But she'll be making it without my retirement savings to sweeten the deal. You don't understand. We love each other. You love my money. She loves the idea of running away from her responsibilities. Don't confuse that with some grand romance. I headed for the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. You've got 24 hours, Rylan. After that, this becomes a federal case, and federal cases don't end with quiet conversations in expensive apartments. Wait. His voice cracked slightly. What about Kalia? What happens to her? I turned back to look at him. This man who'd helped my wife steal my future, who'd planned to disappear with her to some European paradise funded by my decades of work and saving. What happens to Kalia depends entirely on how smart she is over the next 24 hours. But if I were her, I'd start looking for a very good lawyer. Maren Hollis had always been the family member everyone tolerated, but nobody particularly liked. Kalia's cousin was the kind of person who showed up to family gatherings with expensive gifts and subtle complaints about her job, her apartment, her latest boyfriend's shortcomings. She'd become a notary 3 years ago, presenting it as a stepping stone to bigger things that never quite materialized. I found her at her office, a cramped space in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The sign on the door read, Hollis Notary Services, but the waiting area suggested business wasn't exactly booming. Felix! She looked up from her computer with surprise that seemed genuine. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you about some documents you notarized. Mind if I sit down? Her smile faltered slightly, but she gestured to the chair across from her desk. Of course. What documents? I pulled out copies of the withdrawal authorizations, laying them across her desk in chronological order. These, retirement account transfers, all bearing your notary seal. She glanced at them quickly, then back at me. Yes, I remember these. Kalia brought them by over the past few months. Standard stuff. Standard stuff. I nodded. Except for one small problem. What's that? I never signed them. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. What do you mean? I mean these signatures aren't mine, Maren. They're good forgeries, but they're not mine, which means you notarize documents without properly verifying the identity of the signer. That's not possible. Kalia brought them, and she said, what did she say, exactly? Maren's hands were shaking now. She said you'd sign them at home, that you were too busy to come in person. but that it was urgent because of some deadline. And you believed her? She's family. I trusted her. You trusted her enough to violate your notary oath and potentially commit fraud. I leaned forward. Do you know what happens to notaries who falsify documents, Maren? She shook her head mutely. They lose their commission. They face criminal charges. They go to prison. I let that sink in for a moment. But you know what's worse? They become accessories to whatever crime those documents enabled. Crime? Felix, I didn't know. You didn't know that $2.3 million was being stolen from my retirement accounts? You didn't know that your cousin was planning to leave the country with her boyfriend using money taken through forged documents that you notarized? Boyfriend? She looked genuinely confused. What boyfriend? Rylan Ventor, the man who owns Ventor Holdings, LLC, the company that received all the money from these forged withdrawals. Maren stared at the documents spread across her desk like they were evidence of some terrible accident she'd caused without realizing it. I didn't know about any boyfriend. Kalia said it was for tax purposes, something about moving money between accounts to avoid penalties. And you believe that? I'm a notary, not a financial advisor. She's my cousin. She brought me documents that looked official, and she said her husband had signed them. What was I supposed to think? I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Here's what I think, Maren. I think you're going to tell me exactly what happened, exactly what Kalia told you, and exactly what you know about this whole scheme. And I think you're going to let me record it. Why would I do that? Because right now, you're an accessory to fraud. But if you cooperate, if you help me understand exactly how this happened, maybe you're just a victim who got manipulated by a family member. She stared at the phone in my hand. And if I don't? Then I file a complaint with the Secretary of State's office about notary misconduct. I file a police report about forged documents. And I make sure the prosecutor knows that you were a willing participant in a scheme to steal over $2 million. The silence stretched between us while she considered her options. Through the thin walls, I could hear someone getting their nails done in the salon next door, the mundane sounds of normal people going about their normal lives while Maren's world collapsed around her. She called me 6 months ago, she said finally. Said she needed help with some financial planning. Said you were being stubborn about moving money around, that it was causing problems with your taxes. I started the recording. Go on. She brought the first documents in March, said you'd signed them at home but couldn't come in person because of work. She seemed stressed, said there was some kind of deadline. What exactly did she say about the deadline? Something about penalties if the money wasn't moved by a certain date. She made it sound urgent, like you'd be in trouble if I didn't notarize them quickly. And you didn't think to call me, to verify that I'd actually signed them? Maren's voice was barely a whisper. She said you were angry about having to do it at all, that you'd be upset if you knew she'd had to bring them to me because you were being difficult. How many times did she come in? 6 or 7 times over the past 4 months. Always with the same story. You'd signed at home, it was urgent. Please don't mention it because you were already stressed about the financial stuff. I looked at the documents again, seeing them now through the lens of a carefully orchestrated deception. Kalia had played her cousin perfectly, using family loyalty and professional trust to turn her into an unwitting accomplice. Did she ever mention Rylan Ventor? No, never. I swear, Felix, I had no idea there was anyone else involved. What about the company, Ventor Holdings? She said it was some kind of investment fund, something about diversifying your retirement savings. And you never looked up the company? Never checked to see what kind of investments they made? Why would I? I'm a notary, not a financial investigator. My job is to verify signatures and stamp documents, not to research every company mentioned in paperwork. She was right, of course. Notaries weren't supposed to be financial detectives, but they were supposed to verify the identity of signers and Kalia had manipulated that system perfectly. "I need you to write down everything you remember," I said. "Every conversation, every document, every detail about what Kalia told you." "Felix, please. I know I made mistakes, but I never meant—" "I know you didn't. That's why you're going to help me fix this. What do you want me to do?" I stopped the recording and looked at her across the desk. This woman who'd been used as thoroughly as I had, who'd trusted family and been betrayed just as completely. "I want you to call Kalia. Tell her you're scared about the documents, that someone from the state office called asking questions. Tell her you need to meet with her tonight." "Why?" "Because she's going to try to blame you for everything when this falls apart. And when she does, I want to make sure we have her confession on tape." Maren stared at me for a long moment. "You want me to wear a wire. I want you to protect yourself, because right now, you're the only witness who can prove that Kalia orchestrated this whole thing. Without your testimony, it's your word against hers about who knew what. And if she realizes what I'm doing, then we'll both find out just how far she's willing to go to protect herself." The restaurant Maren chose was perfect for our purposes, busy enough that our conversation would be lost in the ambient noise, but quiet enough that a small recording device would pick up everything clearly. I sat 3 tables away, close enough to intervene if things went wrong, far enough away that Kalia wouldn't notice me unless she was specifically looking. Maren had been nervous when I'd wired her up in the parking lot, her hands shaking as I showed her how the device worked. It was nothing fancy, just a digital recorder small enough to fit in her purse, with a microphone sensitive enough to catch conversation across a table. "What if she doesn't say anything incriminating?" Maren had asked. "She will. People like Kalia can't help themselves when they think they're in control. Just act scared and confused. Ask her what you should do if anyone asks questions." Now I watched Kalia enter the restaurant, her eyes scanning the room with the paranoid intensity of someone whose world was falling apart. She'd dressed carefully, business casual, professional, the kind of outfit that said she was handling everything competently. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her purse just a little too tightly. She spotted Maren and walked over, sliding into the booth with practiced grace. From my angle, I could see both their faces clearly. "Thanks for meeting me," Kalia said, her voice carrying across the restaurant's ambient noise. "You sounded upset on the phone." "I am upset." Maren's voice was shaky, but that worked in our favor. "Someone called my office today asking questions about notarizations I did for you." Kalia's composure slipped for just a moment. "What kind of questions?" "About the documents, about whether I properly verified signatures, about whether I knew the purpose of the transactions." Maren leaned forward, playing her part perfectly. "Kalia, what's going on?" "Nothing's going on. Someone's just asking routine questions. Routine questions about specific documents. They knew dates, amounts, everything." Maren's voice rose slightly. "They asked if I knew Felix personally, if I'd ever seen him sign documents." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth. That you brought the documents, that you said Felix had signed them at home, that I notarized them based on your word." Kalia was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming against the table. "That's fine. That's exactly what happened." "But it's not, is it?" Maren's voice dropped to a whisper. "Felix never signed those documents, did he?" The silence stretched between them while Kalia calculated her response. I could see the moment she decided to trust her cousin with the truth. "He would have signed them if he understood the situation," she said finally. "The money was just sitting there earning nothing. Rylan had this opportunity." "Rylan? Who's Rylan?" "Someone who could help us. Help Felix, I mean. Double the money in 2 years, maybe triple it. By stealing it?" "It's not stealing when it's your own husband's money. I'm his wife. I have every right." "You forged his signature, Kalia. You made me an accessory to fraud." "You're not an accessory to anything. You're a notary who did her job. If anyone asks, you tell them exactly what you told me. I brought you documents. You notarized them. End of story." "What if they ask about Felix? What if they want to know why he never came in person? Kalia leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone she used when she wanted to convince someone of something. You tell them he was busy, that lots of people have their spouses bring documents, that you had no reason to question it. But I did have reason to question it. 6 documents over 4 months, all for large amounts, all with the same story about Felix being too busy. Maren, listen to me. Kalia's voice was sharp now. Felix knows about the money. He's angry, but he knows. This is between him and me now. All you need to do is stick to your story. What story? The truth? The truth is that you're a notary who did her job properly. The truth is that you had no way of knowing what Felix had or hadn't signed. The truth is that you trusted a family member who asked for help. I could see Maren processing this, realizing how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. You planned this, she said quietly. You knew from the beginning that Felix hadn't signed anything. I planned to help my family's financial situation. Everything else is just details. Details? Kalia, I could lose my license. I could go to jail. You're not going to jail. You're a victim here, just like Felix. I'm the one who made the hard choices. Hard choices? Maren's voice was incredulous now. You stole over $2 million. I invested $2 million that was earning nothing in retirement accounts. Money that belongs to both of us, by the way. In what? What did you invest it in? Real estate development. Rylan's company has projects that will... Rylan's company. You mean your boyfriend's company? The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. Kalia's face went white. He's not my boyfriend. He's a business partner. A business partner you're planning to run away to Europe with? Who told you that? Felix knows everything, Kalia. The money, the company, the tickets to Lisbon. He knows about all of it. Kalia slumped back in the booth, the fight going out of her all at once. He wasn't supposed to find out. Not like this. How was he supposed to find out? After you disappeared with his money? We weren't going to disappear. We were going to invest the money, let it grow, and then what? Come back and pretend it never happened? Come back with enough money to set everyone up for life. Felix, you, Tessa, everyone. Maren stared at her cousin across the table. You really believe that, don't you? You really think this was some kind of favor you were doing for everyone? It was a favor. Felix is too conservative, too scared to take risks. Someone had to make the hard decisions. Someone had to commit fraud, you mean? Someone had to take action while there was still time. Kalia's voice was rising now, drawing glances from other diners. Do you know what Felix's retirement accounts were earning? 2%. 2% while inflation eats away at everything. Rylan's projects return 20-30% annually. If they're real projects. They're real. The development in Harbor View, the commercial complex downtown? What development in Harbor View? What commercial complex? Kalia stopped talking abruptly, realizing she'd said too much. There are no developments, are there? Maren's voice was quiet now. Just Rylan's apartment and whatever lifestyle you've been funding with stolen money. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You fell for a con man, and you decided to fund your midlife crisis with your husband's retirement savings. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. And now you want me to lie to investigators to cover for you. Kalia reached across the table, grabbing Maren's hand. Please, your family. Family protects family. Family doesn't ask family to commit crimes. I never asked you to commit crimes. I asked you to notarize documents. Documents you knew were forged. Documents that represented money that belongs to me as much as it belongs to Felix. Maren pulled her hand away. No, Kalia. That money belongs to Felix. Money he earned, money he saved, money you stole. I didn't steal anything. Then why are you running away to Lisbon? The question hung in the air unanswered, while Kalia struggled to find a response that didn't incriminate her further. We're not running away. she said finally. We're relocating for business purposes. With one-way tickets bought with stolen money. With tickets bought with legitimately transferred funds. Funds transferred through forged documents that I notarized. Funds transferred through documents that you notarized in good faith, believing they were legitimate. I could see Maren finally understanding the full scope of her cousin's betrayal, not just of Felix, but of her as well. Kalia had used her, manipulated her, and now expected her to lie to federal investigators to protect a scheme that had been doomed from the beginning. I'm not going to lie for you, Maren said quietly. You don't have to lie. Just stick to what you know. I know you committed fraud. I know you used me to do it. I know you're planning to run away with stolen money. Maren stood up from the booth. And I know I'm not going to be part of it anymore. Maren, wait. But her cousin was already walking away, leaving Kalia alone at the table with the wreckage of her carefully constructed plan. I waited until Maren had left the restaurant, before approaching Kalia's booth. She looked up as I slid into the seat her cousin had vacated, her face cycling through surprise, anger, and resignation. Enjoy the show? She asked. Very much, especially the part where you admitted to everything. You were recording us. Maren was recording you. I was just making sure she stayed safe while you confessed to federal crimes. Kalia stared at me across the table, and I could see her calculating one last time, looking for some angle that might save her. The money's gone, isn't it? I said. Not invested, not held in trust, just gone. Spent on apartments and cars and tickets to Europe. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The truth was written across her face. 20 years, I said quietly. 20 years of marriage, and this is how it ends. With you stealing my future to fund a fantasy with some con man you met at a college reunion. It wasn't supposed to be like this. How was it supposed to be, Kalia? What was the plan when the money ran out and Rylan moved on to his next mark? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You got bored, you got scared of getting old, and you decided to burn down everything we built together for a chance at some imaginary perfect life. I stood up, looking down at the woman I'd shared 2 decades with, the mother of my daughter, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world. Enjoy your perfect life, I said. What's left of it? The FinCEN office in downtown looked exactly like what it was, a federal building designed to intimidate people who thought they were smarter than the government. I'd walked through those doors hundreds of times during my 12 years with Treasury, but today felt different. Today I was the victim instead of the investigator. Danny Morrison met me in the lobby, looking older than I remembered, but still carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent decades following money trails that people thought they'd hidden well enough. Felix. He shook my hand with genuine warmth. Sorry it's under these circumstances. Thanks for moving so fast on this. Are you kidding? Financial fraud with international flight risk? This is exactly the kind of case that makes my job interesting. He gestured toward the elevators. Come on up. I want you to meet the team. The conference room on the 7th floor was familiar territory. Whiteboards covered with financial diagrams, computers displaying bank records, and the particular energy that comes from investigators who found something they can sink their teeth into. Felix Rourde. Meet Special Agent Sarah Chen and Agent Tom Bradley. They're handling the Ventor Holdings investigation. Agent Chen was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of sharp focus that suggested she'd been tracking financial crimes for a while. Bradley looked like he'd stepped out of a federal agent casting call, tall, serious, and carrying himself with the authority of someone used to making people nervous. Mr. Rourde, Chen said, gesturing to a chair, we've reviewed your complaint and the supporting documentation. This is a very clean case. Clean? Clear paper trail? Obvious intent to defraud? Documented flight risk. Bradley opened a file folder. Your wife and Mr. Ventor made some interesting choices over the past few months. Such as? large cash withdrawals, international travel bookings, and some very creative accounting in the Ventor Holdings business records. Chen pulled up a computer screen showing bank transactions. Want to see where your money went? The screen displayed a flow chart that looked like a diagram of a shell game. Money from my retirement accounts flowed into Ventor Holdings, then immediately out again to a dozen different accounts and purposes. Apartment rent, car payments, credit card bills, travel expenses, and at the end of each trail, the same two names, Kalia Rourde and Rylan Ventor. $2.3 million, Bradley said, transferred over 4 months through forged documents, spent on lifestyle expenses and preparation for permanent relocation to a non-extradition country. Lisbon isn't a non-extradition country, I said. Portugal is EU, but the processing time for financial crimes can be lengthy, long enough for money to disappear into cryptocurrency or offshore accounts. Chen highlighted several transactions, which is exactly what started happening last week. They were converting to crypto? 50,000 so far, with more scheduled. If you hadn't caught this when you did, recovery would have been nearly impossible. Danny leaned forward. Felix, I have to ask, did you have any suspicion this was happening? Not until I got the notification about changes to my beneficiary information. That's when I started paying attention. And you didn't confront your wife immediately? I wanted to understand the scope first. In our business, you know that confronting suspects too early can cause them to destroy evidence or accelerate their timeline. Smart thinking, Bradley said, because that's exactly what happened when Mr. Ventor realized we were watching him. What do you mean? Chen turned her computer screen toward me. Mr. Ventor attempted to liquidate all remaining assets yesterday afternoon. Cash withdrawals, crypto conversions, even tried to sell his car to a dealer for immediate payment. Tried to? We froze everything while he was sitting in the bank. His accounts, his credit cards, even his apartment lease. Bradley smiled grimly. He's currently staying in a motel and paying with pocket change. What about Kalia? Your wife is in a more complicated position. Technically, she has legal access to marital assets, which creates some gray areas in terms of what constitutes theft. But the forged signatures are clearly criminal. The question is whether she was the mastermind or another victim of Mr. Ventor's scheme. I thought about the recording from last night, Kalia's voice admitting to everything while trying to justify it as investment strategy. I have something that might clarify her level of involvement. I pulled out my phone and played the key sections of Maren's recording. The federal agents listened without comment, their faces giving nothing away, but I could see them making notes as Kalia's words filled the conference room. I planned to help my family's financial situation. Someone had to make the hard decisions. We're relocating for business purposes. When the recording ended, Chen and Bradley exchanged glances. That's very helpful, Chen said carefully, though we'll need the original recording and testimony from the person who made it. Maren Hollis, the notary. She's willing to cooperate fully. Good, because without her testimony about the forged documents, this becomes much harder to prosecute. Danny cleared his throat. Felix, I have to ask what you want to see happen here. We can pursue this criminally, but that's going to be a long process with uncertain recovery of your funds. Or we can use the threat of prosecution to encourage immediate cooperation and restitution. What's the difference? Criminal prosecution means your wife and her boyfriend face federal fraud charges. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time, but criminal cases can take years, and there's no guarantee you'll recover your money. And the other option? We make it clear that cooperation now might influence how aggressively we pursue charges. Full restitution, complete disclosure of all assets, and agreement to certain restrictions in exchange for consideration in sentencing. Bradley leaned back in his chair. Of course, that assumes they have assets left to recover. Based on what we've seen, most of your money has been spent. On what? Chen pulled up another screen. Apartment rent and deposits, car payments, travel expenses, credit card bills that were apparently quite substantial, and about $200,000 in what appeared to be pure lifestyle expenses, restaurants, shopping, entertainment. They spent $200,000 on entertainment? Your wife has expensive tastes, and Mr. Ventor was apparently eager to impress her. I stared at the screen, watching my retirement disappear into line items for dinners and shopping trips and weekend getaways. 20 years of saving, gone to fund a midlife crisis romance between two people who thought they were smarter than everyone around them. What happens now? Now we arrest Mr. Ventor and bring your wife in for questioning. We seize any remaining assets and start the process of tracing what can be recovered. Danny closed the file folder. But Felix, I want you to understand, even in the best-case scenario, you're not getting all of it back. How much? Maybe 60%, 70% if we're lucky, and they've been less creative with hiding assets than I think they have. I nodded, processing the numbers. 60% of $2.3 million was still a substantial loss, but it was better than the total loss I'd been facing 24 hours earlier. Do it. Arrest them both. You're sure? Once we start down this path, there's no going back. Your wife will face federal charges. I thought about Kalia sitting in that restaurant last night, trying to convince her cousin to lie to federal investigators to protect a scheme built on theft and betrayal. I thought about 20 years of marriage ending with forged signatures and one-way tickets to Europe. I'm sure. Chen stood up, gathering her files. We'll need you to come in tomorrow to give a formal statement, and we'll need Ms. Hollis to testify about the notarization fraud. She'll be there. One more thing, Bradley said. This is going to become public. Financial fraud cases generate media attention, especially when they involve substantial amounts and flight risk. Are you prepared for that? I thought about our suburban neighborhood, about Kalia's social circle, about our daughter finding out that her mother was a federal criminal. Let it be public, I said. Maybe it'll keep other people from trusting too much. The arrest happened at 6 a.m, which is standard procedure for financial crimes. People who steal money tend to be flight risks, and flight risks tend to run when they realize the walls are closing in. I wasn't there to watch, but Danny called me afterward to let me know it had gone smoothly. Ventor didn't resist, but he wasn't happy. Kept saying this was all a misunderstanding, that he was a legitimate businessman who'd been set up by your wife. And Kalia? Picked up at home an hour later. She asked for a lawyer immediately and hasn't said anything since. I was sitting in my kitchen when he called, drinking coffee and looking at the newspaper coverage of the arrests. Financial fraud ring nets local couple was the headline, with photos of both Kalia and Rylan being led away in handcuffs. The article was light on details, but it mentioned the amount stolen and the international flight plans. How long before this becomes a circus? It already is. 3 news vans outside the federal building, reporters calling the office asking for statements. This kind of case gets attention. My phone had been ringing all morning. Neighbors, friends, reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. I'd stopped answering after the 5th call from someone wanting to know how it felt to be betrayed by my wife of 20 years. Mr. Rourde? The voice belonged to Tessa, calling from her college apartment 2 hours away. Dad, what's happening? It's all over social media. Your mother made some bad choices, honey. She's going to have to face the consequences. The news is saying she stole money. From you. That's accurate. How much money? I looked at the newspaper photo of Kalia being led away, her face turned away from the cameras, her hands cuffed behind her back. Most of my retirement savings. About $2.3 million. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Tessa? I'm here. I can't believe this is real. It's real, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. There's going to be a trial, media coverage, a lot of unpleasant attention. What about college? What about my tuition? It was a fair question. Tessa's college expenses came from the same accounts that Kalia had been raiding. With most of that money gone, her education was suddenly in jeopardy. We'll figure something out. Student loans, maybe a transfer to a less expensive school. This is insane. Mom wouldn't do this. There has to be some explanation. There is an explanation. She fell in love with someone else and decided to steal my money to fund a new life with him. That can't be right. Tessa, I know this is hard to accept, but your mother confessed to everything. It's not a misunderstanding or a mistake. She committed federal crimes. Another long silence. Can I talk to her? She's in federal custody. I don't know what the visitation rules are. This is going to ruin everything. My friends, my school, my whole life. Your life isn't ruined. Changed, yes. Complicated, absolutely. But not ruined. Easy for you to say, you're not the one whose mother just became a federal criminal. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the newspaper photos and the growing realization that this was just the beginning. The arrests were the easy part. Now came months of legal proceedings, media attention, and family relationships that might never recover. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized. Maren. Felix, I just saw the news. They really arrested her? This morning. Rylan, too. Jesus, I knew this was serious, but seeing her in handcuffs on television. How are you holding up? Scared. The FBI wants me to testify, and Kalia's lawyer has already called asking for a meeting. Don't meet with Kalia's lawyer without your own attorney present. They're going to try to make you look like a co-conspirator. I figured. I've already called someone. She paused. Felix, there's something else. Something I didn't mention before. What? The documents weren't the only thing. Kalia asked me to do something else about a month ago. What kind of something else? She wanted me to notarize a power of attorney, said it was for financial planning, that you needed her to be able to handle transactions while you were traveling for work. A power of attorney. That would have given Kalia legal authority to access accounts, make transfers, even liquidate assets without my knowledge or consent. Did you do it? No. Something about it felt wrong, and I told her I needed to see you in person for something that broad. She got angry, said I was being unnecessarily difficult. Thank God you said no. If I'd done it, she could have taken everything, couldn't she? Everything. Retirement accounts, investment portfolios, even the house. She was planning this for months, wasn't she? The whole thing was premeditated. I thought about the timeline, the power of attorney request, the gradual escalation of forged withdrawals, the shell company setup, the travel arrangements. This hadn't been a crime of passion or opportunity. It had been a carefully planned theft that had taken months to execute. She was planning it for months, maybe longer. I feel so stupid. She's family, and I trusted her. She's family, and I trusted her too. For 20 years. What happens now? Now you testify about what she asked you to do and what you actually did. You tell the truth about the forged documents and the power of attorney request, and you let the federal prosecutors do their job. And Kalia? I looked at the newspaper photo again, trying to see some trace of the woman I'd married in the figure being led away in handcuffs. Kalia's going to federal prison. The only question is, for how long? After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, thinking about the power of attorney that Maren had refused to notarize. If she'd gone along with that request, I might never have discovered the theft, until it was too late. Kalia could have liquidated everything and disappeared to Europe with millions of dollars and complete legal authority to access whatever she'd left behind. The newspaper photo showed a woman who'd been caught, but it could just as easily have shown a woman who'd gotten away with the perfect crime. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've done. I stared at the message for a moment, then forwarded it to Danny Morrison. Threatening communications were another federal crime, and whoever had sent it was about to learn that some people really were too stupid for their own good. The phone rang again. This time it was a reporter from the local newspaper. "Mr. Rourde, I'm calling about the arrest of your wife. Do you have any comment about the charges?" "Yes," I said. "I have a comment." "What would you like to say?" I looked at the newspaper photo one more time, then set it aside. "I'd like to say that trust is earned, not given. And some people spend years earning it just so they can cash it in all at once. Is there anything else?" "Yes. Be careful who you trust with your future, because some people will steal it and call it love." 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching my wife of 20 years face a judge who'd seen enough financial fraud cases to be thoroughly unimpressed by sob stories and creative justifications. Judge Hale Trenwick was exactly what you'd want in a federal judge: experienced, impatient with nonsense, and completely immune to the kind of manipulation that had worked so well on everyone else in Kalia's life. He'd been on the bench for 15 years, and his reputation for harsh sentences in financial crimes cases was well established. Kalia's lawyer had spent months trying to negotiate a plea deal that would minimize her exposure, but the evidence was too clear and the amount too large for the kind of slap-on-the-wrist sentence that white-collar criminals sometimes received. $2.3 million stolen through systematic fraud, with documented plans for international flight, didn't leave much room for judicial sympathy. Rylan had already pled guilty and been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His cooperation with prosecutors had earned him some consideration, but not much. He'd provided detailed testimony about the scheme, the money trail, and Kalia's role in planning and executing the theft. His lawyer had tried to paint him as a victim of Kalia's manipulation, but the financial records told a different story. A story of a man who'd helped plan and execute a sophisticated fraud for his own benefit. Now it was Kalia's turn. She sat at the defendant's table wearing a conservative blue suit that was probably chosen to make her look respectable and remorseful. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style, her makeup minimal, her jewelry absent. Everything about her appearance was calculated to present her as a woman who'd made a mistake, not a criminal who'd spent months planning and executing a complex theft. "Your Honor," her attorney began, "my client is a woman who made poor decisions during a difficult period in her marriage. She was manipulated by Mr. Ventor, who took advantage of her emotional vulnerability." "Counselor," Judge Trenwick interrupted, "your client forged her husband's signature on financial documents, established a fraudulent business entity, and planned to flee the country with stolen funds. Which part of that suggests manipulation rather than leadership?" "The evidence shows that Mr. Ventor was the primary beneficiary. The evidence shows that your client was an equal partner in a scheme to steal over $2 million. Mr. Ventor has already been sentenced for his role. We're here to address your client's role." I watched Kalia's face as the judge spoke, looking for some sign of remorse or understanding of what she'd done. Instead, I saw the same calculating expression she'd worn throughout our marriage when she was trying to figure out how to get what she wanted. The prosecutor stood to present the government's case. Sarah Chen had been thorough in her preparation, and the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged documents, recorded conversations, testimony from Maren about the notarization fraud, and detailed financial analysis showing exactly where every dollar had gone. "Your Honor, this was not a crime of passion or desperation. This was a calculated, systematic theft that took place over months. The defendant forged her husband's signature repeatedly, manipulated family members to assist in the fraud, and planned to flee the country to avoid prosecution. Furthermore, the defendant has shown no remorse for her actions. Even after her arrest, she continued to justify the theft as investment strategy and blamed her husband for being too conservative with his own money." Judge Trenwick reviewed the sentencing guidelines while the courtroom waited in silence. Federal fraud sentencing was based on the amount stolen, the sophistication of the scheme, and the defendant's role in planning and executing the crime. $2.3 million put Kalia in the highest category, and her leadership role eliminated most possibilities for reduced sentences. "Mrs. Rourde," the judge said finally, "do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Kalia stood slowly, her hands clasped in front of her in the same gesture of practiced sincerity I'd seen Rylan use months earlier. "Your Honor, I know I made mistakes. I know my actions hurt people I care about. I was going through a difficult time in my marriage, and I made poor decisions that I regret deeply. But I want the court to understand that I never intended to steal anything. The money belonged to both my husband and me as marital assets. I thought I was making investment decisions that would benefit our family. I realize now that I should have discussed these decisions with my husband, that I should have been more transparent about my actions. But I never intended to commit fraud or hurt anyone." Judge Trenwick listened without expression, then consulted his notes. "Mrs. Rourde, the court has reviewed the evidence in this case, including recorded conversations in which you admitted to planning this scheme, forging documents, and preparing to leave the country with stolen funds. Your claim that this was investment strategy is contradicted by your own words and actions. You didn't invest this money. You spent it on personal expenses and lifestyle choices. You didn't plan to benefit your family. You planned to abandon your family and start a new life with your co-conspirator. This court has seen many financial fraud cases, and this ranks among the most calculated and sophisticated. You systematically exploited family relationships, professional trust, and legal processes to steal a substantial amount of money from your husband of 20 years. The court sentences you to 47 months in federal custody, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution in the amount of $2.3 million, plus interest and penalties. Your passport will be surrendered, and you are prohibited from accessing any financial accounts without court approval." Kalia's composure finally cracked. She sank into her chair as if her legs had given out, her face white with shock. 47 months meant she'd serve at least 39 months in federal prison, with no possibility of early release. Her lawyer immediately began discussing appeal options, but I could see in Kalia's face that she was finally understanding the reality of what she'd done and what it was going to cost her. As the court session ended and Kalia was led away to begin her sentence, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or revenge, but a kind of sad relief. The woman I'd married 20 years ago was gone, had been gone for months or maybe years before I'd discovered the theft. The person being led away in handcuffs was a stranger who'd worn her face and lived in her place while planning to destroy everything we'd built together. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked for my reaction to the sentence. I gave them the same answer I'd been giving for months. Justice was served. That's all I have to say. But as I drove home to the house that now felt too big and too empty, I thought about trust and betrayal, about the coordinates that had led us to this moment, and about the long road ahead of rebuilding a life that someone else had tried to steal. The GPS in my car announced that I'd reached my destination, and I realized I was home. Not the home I'd shared with Kalia, but the place I'd chosen to live after everything fell apart. A smaller house, a simpler life, but one built on truth instead of lies. I changed the GPS password that night, just like I'd changed everything else that had connected me to the woman who'd thought I was too trusting to protect myself. She'd been wrong about that, just like she'd been wrong about everything else. The coordinates of revenge had led exactly where they were supposed to justice, to truth, and to the end of a marriage that had been built on lies I'd been too trusting to see. But I wasn't too trusting anymore.